Hello, in today's video I'm going to talk to you about some of the best practices for administering an online exam using the Blackboard test panel. The page you see in front of you is your test options page, and this is where you control options such as the instructions, availability, due dates, etc. The first option is mandatory. You have to name your exam. I recommend using something clear such as Exam 1, Chapter 1 exam, midterm, etc. Under content link description is where you type a short description about the exam. Rather than specific test instructions, which can be made on the other page when you're creating your questions, this is something a little less specific. You could talk about which chapters it covers, types of topics it's going to be an exam if you really want to go that route, or you can leave it blank. The next section here is labeled Test Availability. In order for your students to see this exam, you have to change that no to a yes. The option below it is Add an announcement for this test. When the yes option is selected, which I do recommend you use, an announcement that says something to the effect of you now have a test available will be added to the student's Blackboard page. It's another way to remind them that they actually have a test to take. The option below is labeled multiple attempts. Generally, you get one attempt when it is a huge exam, such as a midterm or a final. But sometimes I've seen professors use this as a sort of practice tool, or give them 2 chances and choose the better of the grade or something to that effect. If you wish to do that, you would check this box and choose number of attempts. Here you can specifically choose 2 attempts, 3 attempts, etc. Let's just do 2 for our purposes, and then you'll see this box pop up. This says score attempts using. This is how you choose which of the attempts they take will actually be their graded one. It's automatically set to last graded attempt, which means the last time they did it is the last grade they use. If you click on it, a drop-down list appears, and you have other options such as use the highest grade, use the lowest grade, first graded attempt, which is the opposite of last graded attempt, and an average of all graded attempts. The option here, forced completion, I implore that you do not click. Let's take a look at this. On paper it says, once started, this test must be completed in 1 sitting. It sounds really good on paper, but in reality, we run into some issues. When forced completion is checked, that means any sort of navigation away from the page will lock the student out of the exam. So, on the good side, that means if a student closes it to look up an answer, they cannot get back in. On the bad side, which is unfortunately a lot more common than the previous statement, a student will have a glitch in internet, and they will be locked out. But not only will they be locked out, they won't be notified that they're locked out. So they'll be taking the test as normal, and then when they go to submit, they'll get thrown an error message. So basically, they did all the work, and all that work is lost, and they cannot submit the exam. So once again, I recommend that you please do not click forced completion to avoid this error. Rather than forced completion, I suggest that you use set timer. So you can click the box right here that says set timer and choose how long you wish to make your exam. My recommendation is to always give students 5 or 10 more minutes than you really think it would take to complete the exam. This gives any room for technical difficulties, any sort of quick glitches. It doesn't give them enough time to look up an answer, but it makes sure that they're able to actually finish the exam in reasonable time. But underneath you have an option called Auto Submit. By default, when you use a timer, a student can go over time. However, they will be flagged as late in the gradebook and you can deduct accordingly. With the new Blackboard update, there's been an option to turn Auto Submit on. Auto Submit means that after the time is up, this exam will be automatically submitted, completed or not. So now we're going to scroll down and you'll see our friends display after and display until dates. Display after means that the test will become visible to students after the date you set here and the time you set here. Display until is the opposite. You want the test to disappear from student view on the date you set here and the time you set here. Here you have a password to access the test. I have not seen this used often, but if you want to make sure that no one else can access the test, whether it's for a specific group, a specific person, you can set a password. This next section here, test availability exceptions, is new with our update. This allows you to add exceptions to date, time, etc. restrictions. This is really useful when you have someone in the JLC or you have someone that's going away and you're allowing them to take the test at a different time. To add someone to this list, click on Add User or Group, and a pop-up window will appear. On the window, you'll see a list of the students enrolled in the class. You can choose anyone from the list, and then click the Submit button. Once that's done, you can see their name. You can see how many attempts you wish to give them. So if the whole class has single attempts and you wish to give this individual multiple attempts, you can change that. Same thing with the timer. If you want to make them exempt with the timer, you can uncheck that or give them a different time. And lastly, you can adjust that student's specific availability without messing up anything for the rest of the class. Now we're going to scroll down and see the box for due date. Due date is different from display after and display until. The due date by default, the student will be able to see the exam, but they will not be able to access it. When you check off the due date box, the option below will give you an option that says, do not allow students to start the test if the due date is passed. By default, if the due date has passed, a student can access it at a later date. But once again, they will be flagged in the gradebook as late, and you can always deduct accordingly. If this little box below is checked, a student cannot access it after that date. As you'll notice, Blackboard has a lot of different options to sort of get to the same goal, so you can play around and figure out which ones work best for you. The self-assessment options talk about how the grades are going to be calculated. By default, include this test in Grade Center score calculations is checked. Leave that checked if you wish this exam to be graded. Hide results for this test completely from the instructor in Grade Center. When this box is checked and a student takes the exam, the results will be hidden from the instructor as well as the Grade Center. So you as the instructor will not be able to see how the student did if this box is checked. The next section is new with our update, and it is called Show Test Results and Feedback to Students. This is where you control what your students see after they submit. So here you have your after submission. Anything you check here will be visible to students as soon as they click submit on their exam. Score per question, that's the number of points they got. So if they got it correct, they'll be able to see that they got the 2 points. Answers. If you have all answers checked, they can see options A, B, C, and D. If they see the correct ones are checked, they'll be able to see only the correct answers. If submitted is checked, they'll get to see what they clicked. If all 3 are clicked, they'll get to see the test exactly how they submitted it. Moving down the list, you'll see a box for feedback. If feedback is checked, after they submit, they'll be able to see whatever default feedback for the questions you have submitted. And the last option is Show Incorrect Questions. This will allow them to see the questions they got incorrect. Once again, you can play with these options. You can have all of them, you can have one of them, whichever one suits your needs. Now going down, you'll see a second layer. If you click on this, you'll see a number of different choices. we'll work with after all attempts are graded. After all attempts are graded means as soon as everyone in this class has taken the exam and they have been graded, then these options will appear. You can use any combination of one-time view, specific date. You pretty much have to play with these options. But generally, I've seen after submission and after all attempts are graded as the default used. At the bottom of the page, you'll see a section labeled Test Presentation. This is how your students will physically see the exam while they're taking it. There's two main options, all at once or one at a time. I recommend using all at once when you have about 15 questions or less. This way, it isn't cumbersome to keep scrolling down a list of 50 questions. The second option is one at a time. This I recommend to be used when you have 15 or more questions, so 16 to 20, 16 to 100, whatever you're using. This way, it's a lot less cumbersome to keep scrolling down a page. You'll get to see them one at a time. And by default, yes, a student can go back and check the answer. Consequently, if you have prohibit backtracking checked, which I generally recommend you do not use, but then again, if you wish to, go ahead. This option will allow you to stop students from going back and changing an answer once they've moved on. In other words, they can't look back. Now this option down here, I always recommend you use. It's called randomized questions. This means my questions 1, 2, 3, 4 will be different from my friend's 1, 2, 3, 4 who's sitting next to me, and it sort of deters cheating. The last thing I want to touch on is not an option at all, but rather a setting that our institution has as a whole. After about 15 minutes, our university has a setting on Blackboard that times you out, both students and professors. It's a security option to make sure that if you accidentally leave a computer up, someone can't access your Blackboard. In an exam setting, that means that if you are sitting there and not touching your mouse or clicking anywhere, the student will time out. So remind your students to make sure that they are actively taking the test. So even if it's just clicking on white space every minute or so, they should be fine and will not be kicked out. If a student does get locked out and forced completion is not on, as I please recommend you do, they will be able to jump back in and know their time will not be given back. They will be able to pick up where they left off. That is all I have for you today about online test options. Thanks for watching.